Thank you, Sonia, for that. So as I said, it's a long sermon, so I've split it into 3 parts, so it won't feel anywhere near as long as what it is. Is that all right? Okay, brilliant. Sally's going to pop up and do bits of the reading as we go. And I've done this because I think it's good, because we've got this parable about the wedding banquet. And I think it helps to understand it in context of what went on before in chapter 21. Because chapter 21 and 22 of Matthew's Gospel are really the bits in it where Jesus pushes the buttons of the chief priests and the leaders of Israel. And it's worth seeing that progression from mild annoyance at Jesus to wanting to have him killed. Okay? So that's why I'm done it this way. And I dare say it, if you're not doing anything this afternoon, read chapter 21 and 22 and see if it ties up with what I'm saying. But go further than that. Go into 23, 24, and 26, because you get to see how the Pharisees and the Sadducees and it all kind of get roped into this whole thing. And it ends with the trial in the Sanhedrin where all these people gather. So if you're not doing anything this afternoon, and why wouldn't, just read those 21 to 26. You'll love it. But where are we in the story of Jesus? Well, Jesus is back in Jerusalem for the last time. It's the start of Passover week. The cross is looming. But for now, the chief priests see Jesus and his followers, their arrival in Jerusalem, as just a bit of a nuisance. That's all, a bit of a nuisance. They're not thinking at all about having him killed. But all of that will change in a few short days. Jesus, as I say, is about to press a few buttons, and something has got to give. From the chief priest's point of view, it's probably the worst time for Jesus to arrive. The city was already a pressure cooker. The Passover festival, it drew thousands of people from around the area. They're excited crowds from everywhere. The city is overcrowded. It's overstressed. And don't forget, there's an occupying foreign army there as well. And Pilate, he's in there as well. They don't want to sort of rock the boat with him. You know, they're doing everything they can, the chief priests, just to keep a lid on things. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to upset Pilate or Herod. What they needed, what they really, really needed, was everyone to have a quiet week. They didn't get that. They didn't get that at all. So when Jesus rolls in on a donkey on Friday, the already excited city is nervously watching to see what happens next. Who is this, they're asking? What are the crowds singing? What does it all mean, they say to themselves. And by the time Jesus has turned over the money changers' tables in the temple, he's healed the blind, the lame, engaged in an impromptu sing-song along with all the temple crowds. They're all singing Hosanna to the Son of David. The city is besides itself, and the chief priests feel duty-bound to intervene. Do you hear what they're singing, they say? The indignant chief priests ask Jesus. Effectively, what they're saying to Jesus is, can you keep the noise down a bit, please? It's the equivalent of if you've ever had a noisy neighbour who's had a late party, and you go round to them and say, do you mind just lowering the volume a bit, please? When in your head, what you really want them to do is end that party and send all the guests home. Yes? It's that kind of thing going on there. They are being so polite to Jesus at this point. Day 1, done. Chief priest, 0. Jesus, 1. Day 2, and Jesus really ups the ante with the chief priests. He enters the courts, the temple courts, for a second time. And he's teaching them. And while he's teaching them, the chief priests turn up. And they obviously had to think about how it all went yesterday and everything they didn't get done. And they've got a plan now. They've got a way of working out how to deal with this nuisance that is Jesus. And by the end of today, they hopefully, if all goes according to plan, they will have sent him packing off back to Nazareth with his tail between his legs. They want to know, and it's understandable, really, if you think about it. They want to know what gives him the right to do and say the things that he is currently doing and saying. But Jesus is having none of it because he knows in their hearts it's corrupt what they're doing. They're trying to they have this corrupt feeling about the question. Let's try and trap him. And he knows there's something corrupt about what's going on in their hearts. So he does what Jesus often does when asked a question. He asks them a question instead. Brilliant. Must remember that one. He says to them, I'll tell you my answer if you first tell me the answer to this question. And the question basically is, was John the Baptist a legitimate prophet? The chief priests instantly see the trap that Jesus has set for them. If they answer yes to Jesus, then Jesus can turn around and say, well, why the heck didn't you support him more? Why don't you do the things he said? If they say, no, he wasn't a legitimate prophet, John the Baptist, although he was dead, was still really popular. The crowds would start to hate him, or hate them, sorry. So they know they can't answer yes or no. So they answer in the worst possible answer you can get, which is, we don't know. We don't know. So Jesus then says, well, if you don't know the answer to that question, I'm not going to tell you the answer to my question. It really winds them up. You can sense the tension with the chief priests. Plan A, out the gate, has failed. And they haven't got a plan B for the day. But Jesus is not going to let them get away with it. He capitalizes on their humiliation and tells them three parables. The third of those parables is the one that Sally will read to us shortly, not yet, because we've got to quickly go through the other two because they are really important to making sense of parable 3. By the end of the first parable, which is the parable of the two sons, Jesus has basically accused the chief priests of being blind to John's message. A message that less well-educated, academic, ordinary general public people got instantly, yet the chief priests didn't get at all. And he's basically saying, well, look, if they got the message and you didn't, what's the point of you? You don't get it. So don't have a go at me about what I'm saying because you don't get anything. The pot is now boiling. Immediately, and he doesn't give them a chance to breathe here, immediately he goes on to the second parable, which is the parable of the tenants. This is why you have to go home and read all this when you get home. Just read it, it's lovely. And in this one, Jesus tells them in no uncertain terms that because the chief priests have been so treacherous with God's love for his people, God is going to take everything away from them. Button pushed. They are now ready to have him killed. Job done. Well, not quite. It's one thing wanting to have someone killed because they annoy you. It's quite another thing trying to justify that decision. And in parable 3, the wedding banquet, which we are about to hear most of it, Jesus gives them just what they need, the justification for wanting him dead. Sally.
Matthew 22, verse 1. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who'd been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who've been invited that I've prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, ill-treated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you can find." So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests.
If you're a chief priest listening to that, and you've had everything that's gone on just before, I think you know where it's going. So in parable 2, they were told that they had done God's work so badly, I'm just getting a bit of echo, thank you, badly, that God was going to take their role away from them. And in parable 3, the one we just heard, they learned that God is going to make sure that the good news is going to be available to everyone. It's not going to stay in Jerusalem. It's not going to be for a small, select nation. You're out, chaps, is what Jesus is saying. It's time to move out the way. And the chief priests now know just how dangerous Jesus was to them and everything that they stood for. He had to be taken out, and great news, we are going to do it under the guise of protecting God, protecting Abraham's children, protecting the faith. They now had the justification and the cover of respectability for having Jesus killed. They were protecting the faith from the Gentiles and the undesirables. They just needed to find a way to do it. It will come in the guise of a friend, but for that's another day. It's tempting to say that is it. That's the end of that parable. It ends there, but not so. There's a really interesting twist in the final bit of the parable.
Matthew 22, verse 11. When the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. "Friend," he asked, "how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen."
Thank you again. So what is going on with the end of this parable? You will recall, in the earlier bit, the original invitees are all out of the picture. They've been taken out completely. Remember, the king had them all killed. This is a particularly bloodthirsty parable, if you notice. And now it's time for the new guests to be called. So the king goes off and invites them from far and wide. And many people unexpectedly receive this invitation and they respond. And they all come to the feast. The king then enters the wedding feast, the banquet, the wedding hall. But someone catches his eye. One of the guests is not wearing the correct clothing. When the king asks why the man is not wearing the correct clothing, the man is speechless. Maybe he's ashamed. Maybe he's just seeing the king and he just cannot get the words out. And the king then turns on him. He says, and he is equally ruthless as he was with the original guests. He says to this chap, the king is equally ruthless with this chap, and as he was with the original set of guests. He has him bound, hand and feet, and the man is thrown out of the wedding hall and into the darkness, where there will be a weeping and gnashing of teeth. Ooh, last page. So what is this about? What is going on? Well, perhaps we need to remember just who Matthew was writing to when he wrote his gospel. It wasn't particularly at us. As much as we would like to think it, it wasn't particularly at us. It was written for Jewish followers. It was written in the time of great upheaval, somewhere around 85 BC. Jerusalem had been destroyed. Followers had been displaced everywhere. And these early Christian followers probably were feeling it. They'd probably been isolated from their family, the synagogue, the communities that they grew up in, and so on. Their original audience of Matthew was most likely to be quite fragile. They're feeling hurt. They're vulnerable. They're trying to understand and navigate their way in this new religion outside of their old community. They've been alienated from the synagogue, from communities, from families, from friends. Doubt and uncertainty would inevitably creep in. It has to. And so Matthew throws this last bit into this parable, a reminder to them to remain firm with the faith that they have been called and to the one who called them. The first part of that parable, or the bit that Sally read first of all, that's an important part in the Jesus narrative. It absolutely gives us that understanding of what's going on with the chief priests. But it's also an encouragement to the new church community. Look, the old has gone, is what Matthew is saying. He reminds them, it's all gone, all that stuff, it's all out the way. And you have been invited to the new banquet. And the king is coming. The wedding is about to take place. And that second bit, which seems a bit harsh, throwing that man out because he didn't have the right wedding gear, that's about strengthening your resolve in the face of any doubt or uncertainty. Being invited is one thing, but don't fall back. Be prepared. Make sure you're wearing the right clothing. What the right clothing means is up for debate. No one really knows. It could be, lead a blameless life. Don't be sinful. Be faithful. It could be any one of those or a number of other things. No one really knows. But it is about keeping close to Jesus. Keeping the faith might be a slogan that we would use in modern times. Keep the faith. Matthew concludes with that famous line, many are invited, but few are chosen. Make sure, he is saying, make sure you're in the latter half of that group. You've been invited, make sure you stay chosen. It's about Jesus and about what he has done. Paul, in the reading that Sonia read us, puts it this way, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. The Lord is near, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So for all of us who are finding life just a bit tricky at the moment, take heart from these passages. The old has gone, and you have been invited to a feast. You are the chosen ones. Keep the faith and rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. Please go home and read it. You will love it. It's really good. 21 to 26. Thank you. Amen.